So last week I demoed the custom image map modules, custom image map and custom image map with radio buttons. So if anybody remembers this, this was a way for you to add clickable areas to an image. And this is with an image file, so a PNG or a JPEG. There's also a module called SVG image map, and that is a scalable vector graphic. So instead of pixels, it's built out of paths, and it can be scalable. So anytime you increase the resolution, it redraws itself basically mathematically using the paths, so it can shrink and grow. So if you have an SVG, you can use this for the image map. It's a little different. Same concept, but it's very different in how you set it up, and it's very different in how you edit the image files because it's not pixel based. It's an XML. It's an XML based image. But let me show you how it works. So here we have an example. This is the example that's in the documentation. So if you highlight, you hover over any of the stars, it'll select them down here. And different to the image map here, whereas this one, where if we select it, it actually holds on to the area. With the image map, it doesn't do that. It just, you can set the styling, the highlight, you can add a border, that kind of thing, but it doesn't change anything in the image. So you have to have the field down here instead of it being hidden. And in the config, it says that it works for checkboxes, drop downs, and radio buttons, but I've only got it to work for the checkboxes. If I set these to radio buttons or drop downs, they don't select for some reason, so I'm not sure why. I think that might be a bug in that module. So this would be something where you'd select all the stars. This is another, so this was the image from the documentation, and then you can get that image on their GitHub. This one I pulled off of Adobe Stock, which is just an SVG for a bunch of shapes. And so that way I could test it myself. And this was kind of complicated because, and I'll show you in a minute here, because these are not as straightforward as when we saw the areas for the custom image map, where you could kind of see where you drew, because you're not drawing areas, you're actually just adding information to paths that already exist, and trying to find these paths can kind of be a pain, especially when you have something very complex like this, because each one of these areas, each one of these shapes, and I'll show you in Illustrator, each one of these shapes is its own path, and they're layered on top of each other. So finding these areas can be complicated. So this is similar to the liver drawing here. I pulled this one off of Adobe Stock as well. And you can see down here that when I click on these values, it checks the box for us. So just to show you real quick, this is the SVG stars example. And you can see here that each one of these paths is in a group. That's just how this file was made. You don't have to have them in a group, but that's how this file was made. And then this is the Adobe one. And I went and added these labels in Illustrator. If you have a vector graphics editor or any kind of vector editor, you can do this. There's GIMP online that you can do. There's a few, but I just wanted to show you in Illustrator. What I did was when I labeled these layers, when I export the SVG, it'll actually have that name. So that helps me try to find these areas. And it was really helpful for this liver, because you can see here, all of these are paths, and anything that's in a group, you have to get down to the path level. So here, this is a group, and then there are these paths, because every little thing here, like all these little gradients, each one of these is a path. And so you can see here when I highlight the section here, but there's also this color section behind and things like that. So really trying to find all these, you have to do some work beforehand to get your SVG image sort of ready. And what I did was I pulled out all these labels and put them in a group. You can see here when I click on these, all the labels turn off. And then I have the regions. I pulled all those out and put them in a group so that way I could have the regions. And then I gave each region its own name so that way whenever I export, save it as the SVG, because you're going to edit this in XML and you need to be able to find these regions. So for example, this is the liver SVG, and here are all the regions. These are all the paths. And, you know, you're not going to be able to figure out where any of these things are because they're all just numbers. And so when I saved this and had the regions, you'll see down here, it gave me the data name of region 1, region 2, region 3. So then I was able to grab those areas, those paths, and put them together so I could act upon them and have these clickable areas for the SVG image. But this is a very complex example. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a simpler example. This is the one we built last week. Oh, let me reset that and go down here to Zoom. So just a simple example here. This is an SVG image that I just built in here, and I just added these 3 shapes. And it's similar. So instead of it being an image with HTML on it, we're actually creating an XML SVG file. And you'll see here, if we look at the source, it's kind of similar to the way we did the clickable areas in the other ones, where each one has its own path. And, you know, this one's rectangle, this one's ellipse, and this one's path. The way we kind of had the 3 options last time. And this is very easy. You know, if you want to, this is an online editor that they recommend, and it's very easy. You set up your little canvas, what size you want your canvas to be. And then whenever you get the shapes, you can just draw your shapes here, you know, with these tools, different shapes here. And then when you click on a shape, you can change the size and the location, that kind of thing. You can align it, and then you can change the color. I'm not really going to go into too much detail about that because this isn't about building SVG images. This is about creating image maps. But what we would do is once you create this image, you would save it. And I have one saved called basic shapes. So I'm just going to open that. And you can see here that it gives us a title. We can get rid of that. We don't need that. But within this G tag, we have the 3 shapes that are created. We have the rectangle. Let me make this bigger. We have the rectangle, we have an ellipse, and we have a path. So a path is more of a complex shape. Rectangle is similar to, you know, rectangle, square, any quadrilateral. And then ellipse is for circles and anything. That one's a little different because you have to give it the height and the width. So that way, if you want a circle, they're both the same. Oval or ellipse, you would make them different sizes. So once we get to this level, we have to make some changes in order to use this SVG for an image map. So the first thing that we need to do in the opening SVG tag here is we have to add this namespace. And this is in the documentation. Let me show you the documentation real quick. So down here, it tells you everything that you need to do. And so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add this opening attribute, this namespace here, which you could just copy directly from this and paste it in your shapes. And it has to be up here in the opening SVG tag. The next thing that we need to do is each element has to be wrapped in this hlink href anchor tag. So I'm going to grab that. And I found that it's easiest to, instead of trying to wrap each one of these individually, it's easier to just create 3 of these because it's going to automatically close the tags for you. And this is Visual Studio Code. You could do Notepad or any other text editor that you prefer. So we're creating 3 of these, 1 for each path, and we're gonna just cut these and paste them in because they have, the anchor tag has to wrap around. And let me delete that one. The anchor tag has to wrap around because you're basically creating a clickable area similar to a hyperlink. So let me just close these up, and I'll just format it to make it nice. So now we have 3 anchor tag sections in here. And then the next thing we need to do is we have to add this data RC choice attribute. And this is similar to the attribute we had to add to the other custom image maps. You're basically, it's an attribute that's telling you, or telling REDCap rather, what value you're assigning to that clickable area. So we're going to put that here in each anchor tag. So we're going to have a data RC choice equals space. And we're going to do each one of these. And I already have these set up. So this is going to be 1, this is going to be 2, and this is going to be 3. So this is all you need to do to create a clickable image. So let me just save this. I'll save it as something else. Save as. So now what we would do is we would go into our REDCap project here. And I already have the fields set up. And similar to the custom image map fields, you have to have one field, a descriptive text field for the image, and then you have to have another field to hold the values. So I have this already set up, this basic shapes map and the basic shapes values. Now, the difference is in the other modules, you had to come in here and add your action tags, and it had some values that you're putting in. We don't have to do that in this one. For this one, what we do is we have to go to the modules. And once again, if you want to do the module, you would just click enable and then start typing, and it would be SVG. It's already enabled, so it's not going to pop up, but I already have it enabled here. You have to click the configure tab, and in each one of these, you're putting your values in here instead of having to do it in the field. So what the first thing you do is you have to select the file that you want to embed. So this is the stars example. And then you have to tell it which descriptive field you're going to use for the SVG, and then which one is going to hold the values. So it's these 3 values that you need for each SVG in your project. So to add one, we just go down to the bottom here and click the plus sign, and it's going to give us a whole new group to add. So then I click choose file. I'm going to choose the basic shapes demo, that SVG that I just created. And then I'm going to select the basic shapes map for the descriptive field, and then basic shapes for the selected shapes. Now I'm going to save and upload. And if we go back to the instrument here, when we scroll down, now we have this image. And you can see here that my cursor changes to the hand, which shows you that it's a clickable area. So if I click it, the square gets checked, the circle gets checked, and the star gets checked. Now, this is all you have to do to have a clickable image, but you can add some styling. So if we look at the liver segment one here, if whenever I hover, you can see that the sections are being highlighted by a border. So we can add that. And we can also add a film. So similar to the way this is, where you want a color, it won't persist. It'll only happen when you hover over it, but you could at least have a color that changes the color of the shape when you're on top of it so you can see it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my SVG code, and I have to add, we're going to use CSS to do this. So I have to add a style section. And then I have to add rules for for the hover. So we want to act on this tag here, this anchor tag. So there's a pseudo class called hover. So we do a:hover. And then, but we don't want this to work on every link, because anything that has an anchor tag, it's going to put these styles against. So we only want it to act against these paths that we have here. So we have to add the rect, the ellipse, and the path. So we have to do 3 separate rules. So we're going to say a:hover rect, and then a:hover ellipse, and a:hover path. This just allows us to add one rule that acts for every one of these. And because if you want to do multiple elements, you just separate them by icon. And then what we're going to do is add our rules. So let's say we want to add a stroke. So we're going to do stroke width. And let's do 8 pixels. And we want to give a color to the stroke. So we're going to say gold. And then if we want to add a fill for the shape, we just say fill. And this is similar to the other color we used where we did RGBA, which is a red, green, blue value. And then it has an alpha channel, which gives you some transparency. So we're going to do like a yellow. So 255, 255, 0 is yellow. And then we're going to do 0.5. So it's like halfway transparent. So that should be good for the style. And that's all you need to add.
You need to fix a path to a hover path.
Oh, thank you.
Right?
Yep. Thank you very much. So now we're going to save this. And we have to go back to our config here, and we have to upload the image again. So when we did the custom image maps in the previous example last week, we had to actually upload our images to a server and have them hosted from a server, and we used imager.com. This one, we don't have to use a server to host. It'll upload the image to your REDCap project. So if you change your image, what you have to do is you have to delete the file and then re-add it. So if you delete the file, you just hit delete file, but it doesn't give you the option of adding the file again. So what you have to do is you have to hit save and then come back in the image map and then add your file again. If you just remove this, and you could remove it and add it again and then just put all your values in again. But if you're just changing the image, it's easier just to do that. So now that we have our image, we refresh our form here. And now when we hover, we're applying a gold border and a yellow kind of semi-transparent. And it's not combined, even though this is transparent, it's not combining the blue and the yellow, because what it's doing is it's replacing that blue fill with a semi-transparent yellow fill. So now when we hover over, it changes the color in the border, and it still has the same functionality. And you could add the functionality where if you clicked on this, it stayed yellow, similar to this, but you would need to add more. It's more complex because you have to basically create an attribute that tracks what's been clicked and what's been selected. So you're adding more attributes to keep track of these values, and then you have to use JavaScript to assign these classes or these attributes when they're clicked or unclicked, and then that has to apply to the CSS styling. So that's a lot more complicated. And I could probably do a demo on that sometime, but right now this is just showing you the basic SVG demo. And that's pretty much it. So I don't see the benefit of having the SVG image map. I think it's a lot more complicated with not as many benefits as using the other two. One, you're limited to checkboxes, and two, you don't get the highlighted regions like this. So you have to keep the field open so you can see what has been selected. and it's a lot more complicated to, you have to do a lot more coding. But if somebody has an SVG image that they want to use, then this gives them that option. What I would do if it was me is I would export that SVG image as a JPEG or a PNG and then put it in and use one of the other maps. Because one of the benefits of using the SVG is that it's scalable. So if I zoomed in, like for example, if we go back to the picture here, if I zoom in to like 1600, right, and we'll scroll over here, the tiny little scroll bar, you'll see here that the border of the circle is crisp. So I've zoomed in, 1600 times and it's still crisp. That's the benefit of the SVG, is it remaps everything as it zooms in. So you don't have like a pixelated image. But I don't know how beneficial that would be in REDCap when you're using things that are, you're limited to the size of something in REDCap. But I wanted to show you in case somebody does have an SVG, they at least have this option. And then, you can, if you're more familiar with XML and things like that and JavaScript and CSS, then you can make it more complicated if you want.